Hello and welcome to another installment of the First Chapter series. I am your lovely host, Miss Disney, and we're going to be in this episode, we are going to be reading the next installment of the Vera Strange Disney Chills series called The Circle of Ter-Roar. And in this story, it's about 12-year-old Silas's little brother is the worst. The baby, George, sucks up all of their parents' time and energy until there's nothing left. But when the family suddenly comes into ownership of a run-down summer camp halfway across the country, Silas is hopeful that things will change. The camp is in worse shape than they thought, however, and will require a lot of help to reinvigorate it. When Silas finds an old lion's pelt that he thinks contains the spirit of the camp, good things finally start to happen. Until he feels eyes watching every move he makes. And then his brother disappears. Will Silas be able to get him back? Or will George be lost forever? Let's get started. Chapter 1. Scaredy Cat. Silas wasn't sure how his life could get any worse. It was the first day of summer break. Most kids were thrilled for 3 months of no school, zero homework, sleeping late, loads of free time, and perpetual sunshine. Although that wasn't unusual in his hometown of Orlando, where it was warm and sunny all year round. But not Silas. He was miserable. He cracked his eyes open to bright sunlight and clear blue skies outside his window. Typical Florida weather. The vertical blinds flapped lazily in the draft, siphoned from the air vents, casting bars of light around his bedroom. It felt more like a prison. He badly wished the yellow bus would come careening down his cul-de-sac and break him out of his house, taking him to school. But it was summer, and that wasn't going to happen. Silas sighed and turned his gaze back to his room. Though it was humid and sheltering outside, his room was chilled down to a perfect 72 degrees, thanks to the air conditioning's constant blasting. Despite the beautiful bright day, his heart still thumped from a horrible nightmare. He tried to remember it. All he knew was that he'd been falling and falling, overwhelmed by that terrible feeling where the floor drops out from under you and your stomach. And then his memory went black. Sweat stains soaked his sheets and pillow. Fear gripped him, along with that terrifying falling sensation. It took him a moment to calm his breathing and come back to reality. I'm okay. It was only a dream. Nothing to be afraid of. Silas tried to focus on his surroundings and wake up fully. Library books weighed down his Buzz Lightyear bedspread, a relic from when he was still in elementary school. He didn't even watch those kiddie movies anymore, but his parents refused to waste money on replacing things that worked perfectly well. He rubbed his tired eyes and sat up in bed, trying to push the sleep from them. When he cracked them back open, he startled as they fell on, a ferocious lion snarling at him. His heart thumped. This was just like his terrifying nightmare the previous night. He didn't have to wonder what triggered it. The culprits lay right in front of him. The library books. One stared back at him with a thick-maned, regal-looking lion on the glossy cover. It was a non-fiction book called The King of Beasts. As usual, he had stayed up way past his bedtime reading. He never meant to, but books had magical powers, which was the only explanation, that sucked him into their pages and wouldn't let go, until he nodded off with them, cracked open in his lap. Bits and pieces of his nightmare started to come back to him, almost like scenes from a movie. An evil lion with glowing green eyes had been stalking him. Silas tried to run away from the ferocious beast, but the lion was too fast and chased him off a cliff. He clung to the edge with his feet dangling over the treacherous drop. The lion crept over, as if to save him, but instead the lion clawed at his hands. Silas screamed as he lost his grip and fell toward the ground and most likely his death. That was the last thing he remembered before he woke up. He knew that he should stop reading the books if they gave him nightmares every night, but he couldn't help it. Evident from what was scattered across his bedspread, Silas loved two kinds of books the most. The first was real-life nature books filled with colorful images of wild animals, especially the kind with sharp teeth. The more ferocious the animal, the better. He got goosebumps simply reading about those fearsome creatures, or looking at their pictures and imagining that somewhere out there, far away from the boring suburb with a quiet cul-de-sac where he lived, those creatures roamed through the wilderness and might spring out and eat you. His absolute favorite animals were lions. Of course, black panthers and leopards, with an honorable mention to great white sharks and polar bears. The second type of book he loved was filled with action, telling stories about brave explorers embarking on dangerous adventures to discover new lands. Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs remained his all-time favorite. Silas opened a paperback copy of that one, thanks to his dad in a dusty sale bin at a used bookstore. He had read it so many times that the pages were dog-eared and crumbling. He preferred the old book to the many movie versions, though his friends thought he was unbelievable for liking words more than something you could watch on TV. Basically, he read to escape from his regular life, and those types of books were the furthest thing from his daily, boring existence. He also read to pretend he wasn't a timid little kid afraid of, well, everything. When Silas read his books, he felt brave and strong, like he could defeat any enemy or triumph over any challenge. But as soon as he closed the pages, he turned back into a scaredy cat. The nasty nickname flashed through his head. However, he didn't like to think about that. Silas shifted around, knocking some books onto the floor. They landed with a sharp thwack. The jolt woke up the digital clock on his bedside table. It was already past 9 a.m. He'd slept in for once. His alarm remained dormant, unset, and unnecessary. Silas sat up, trying to get himself up after his reading-induced insomnia, and surveyed his bedroom. It looked like a normal kid's room with a narrow twin bed and a wobbly bookshelf overfilled with tomes, some spilling out onto the floor. There was also a giant pile of dirty laundry that he'd been putting off washing. He was 12, old enough to do chores and help out, at least according to his parents, though all evidence pointed to the contrary. The laundry heap had grown perilously high and threatened to topple over and create an avalanche across his whole room, burying everything in sight, including him. Sooner or later, it would get him into big trouble when his parents bothered to notice. But for now, it kept growing taller. Silas let out a deep sigh. Ugh, summer. He missed school for 3 big reasons. 1, he got to see his best friends, Jose and Tamara, first thing every morning at the bus stop. They lived on the same street and had been friends since the first day of kindergarten. They had sat together on the bus, and the rest was history. Every day with them by his side qualified as a great day. And 2, he loved reading, and his 6th grade English teacher, Mrs. Hamlet, always picked out the best books from the library for him. She chose the adventure kind filled with thrilling expeditions to faraway places and heroes who were never afraid of, well, anything. They were fierce and courageous, basically the total opposite of him. Although he tried to hide his fears and anxieties so nobody found out and teased him about it. But the truth was far different. Even the sight of his own shadow spooked him sometimes. He often jumped coming around corners, then tried to brush it off so as not to draw notice. Not to mention creepy spiders, 8 legs and 8 eyes, plus venom. Why did anyone like Spider-Man? Traffic. Dad said Florida drivers were special. Clowns. They smiled too much. Dark basements. Not that there were any in Florida, but he'd seen enough spooky movies to know they existed for no good reason other than to get you killed. And broccoli. It was basically an alien vegetable. He had a long list of phobias. He was even afraid of being afraid. This unknown sinking feeling around the future. And the worst one of all, that nobody would find out about his cowardice. Like that incident in first grade and everyone would taunt him. Scaredy cat. He shuddered at the memory. Even his friends Jose and Tamara had laughed at him for being scared of that stuffed spider in the toy bin. But Silas couldn't help how his heart hammered. His breathing got shot and spastic. And fear flooded through his whole body, feeling it feel rigid. He'd backed away from the chest while the other kids yelled, "Scaredy cat, scaredy cat." He's afraid of a stuffed animal. Go back to kindergarten. Ever since then, he'd avoided toy bins and vowed to keep his fear in check so it would never happen again. And it had worked. No more fear attacks, no more taunts of scaredy cat. School had been great since then. But always in the back of his mind, he could hear the kids teasing him. Loud shrieks exploded from his parents' bedroom across the hall. They cut through the house. Wah! That was the third reason Silas missed school. It got him out of the house and away from his baby brother. The cries grew shriller and louder. Silas winced and tried to plug his ears, but it did no good. Police sirens were quieter than baby George. If he hadn't been fully awake yet, Silas sure was now. The shrieking continued and showed zero signs of letting up. Mom called it colic. But Silas suspected it was George's way of demanding all his mother's attention, so there was none left over for him. And George didn't just cry during the day, but off and on all night long, waking up everyone in the house whenever he pleased. Wishing he had thick headphones, the heavy-duty noise-canceling kind worn by construction workers, Silas got himself up and sifted through the dirty laundry, piled for something clean enough to wear. The mound threatened to collapse. Pulling out clothes was like playing Jenga. He settled on a T-Rex shirt with a chocolate stain smudged across the sleeve from where he'd wiped his mouth. However, the chocolate didn't count as a stain, he decided, since it was the single best thing in the world. Silas thought that it was more like a badge of honor. He pulled on his board shorts, good for playing and swimming, and glanced in the mirror, trying to flatten his dark hair. His bangs were too long and badly needed a trim. Silas's bronze skin absorbed the sunlight, turning richer and more golden as summer dragged on, and his hazel eyes were the color of fresh straw. Mom used to cut his hair, but she'd been too busy with the baby. As he stared at his overgrown bangs dripping into his eyes, he realized that his life was full of used tos. He looked like a mix of his parents, who themselves were mixed too. Dad had gotten them all one of those at-home DNA kits last year. Dad's side of the family came from the Dominican Republic, while his mom's side, her heralded from Cuba, though Silas had never visited either place. They did FaceTime calls with his grandparents, who still lived across the ocean. But to his father's surprise, the test came back showing that their ancestors originated from not just the Dominican Republic and Cuba, but all over the world, including countries on other continents like Africa and Asia. Dad pinned the results with the world map displaying their ancestry to the family corkboard, proudly proclaiming that was what made them Americans. Silas shut his closet and turned to his door. He half hoped Mom would come check on him and make sure he was ready, like she used to. But George was still wailing. Wah! Oh well, Silas was on his own for now. He knew he should brush his teeth, but decided what his parents didn't know couldn't hurt them. Plus, he'd brushed them the previous night. Why did you have to do it twice a day? He felt the same way about making his bed every morning. He glanced at the rumpled comforter strewn with books. Why make it if you were just going to mess it up again that night? Sometimes adults and their rules made no sense. Regardless, he found himself doing a lot of things for himself lately. His parents loved him. He knew that without any doubt. But they seemed so preoccupied. Not that he couldn't take care of himself. He knew he was old enough for that. But still, he missed when his mom would wake him up gently and help him get dressed for school, then feed him homemade pancakes in the shape of a mouse, with chocolate chips if he was extra lucky. Then Dad would walk him to the bus stop. "Who's my favorite kid?" Dad would say before leaving him at the end of the cul-de-sac to wait for the yellow bus, their ritual every morning. "Me," Silas would giggle back, "but I'm also your only kid." Dad would muss his hair. "Ha, but that'll never change." "Promise?" Silas would say. "Promise," Dad would reply, sweeping him into a tight hug. Only it had. Silas sniffed the air hopefully, wishing for pancakes, but it only smelled of stale coffee. No cooking aromas hung in the air. No sounds of happy chatter. His heart sank. With a heavy sigh, Silas trudged downstairs to the ceaseless wailing of his baby brother as it reverberated through the house. George was miserable, and nothing was going to change that today. Cold cereal will have to do. Again, Silas thought glumly.